Hello everyone and welcome back to the Plutonium Show. Thank you so much for choosing to join me today. So the agenda. I've been keeping a close eye on the Marius Borg Høiby trial, and it is becoming very clear what his defense strategy is. Then we are going to talk about the York-Epstein Files. Could history be repeating itself? Before we finally land on the big side reveal from the Sussex household in Montecito. We all saw this one coming. So last week, I started, after being requested to by many of you, talking about the Marius Borg Høiby trial, which involves 38 counts of incredibly serious allegations, which include rape. So if you're not caught up on the background of that, I do suggest you refer back to episode 147, which, by the way, I will say that these podcast episodes will not be permanently on YouTube. They do stop, getting views because podcasts are meant to be timely and you talk about things as they happen. And so they lose relevance. So to give patrons just a little bit more exclusivity, I will leave them up there for as long as my Patreon exists, if I don't shut it down one day. But on YouTube, I have started cleaning up a little bit because the podcast episodes are numerous. As you can see, we're in episode 148, and they do tend to clutter the channel a little bit. I do try to keep these up as long as they're relevant, as long as they're generating views, and then when they go to sleep, they just remain on Patreon. Quick aside, now back to what we were talking about. So episode 147 is still up as we speak. So please do check it out if you don't have any background on this case. But I've been reading up as I have mentioned. And on Friday, the 13th, one of Marius's alleged victims testified. There are 4 women testifying against him, and this is the 3rd woman. And when it comes to rape trials, the central question is consent, of course. Because if you consent to something being done to you, it is no longer rape. In this particular case, as we discussed last week, the women were passed out, unconscious, and Marius filmed himself doing what they alleged he did to them. And so the prosecution is calling these women as witnesses to testify that they never gave consent. They couldn't have because they were not conscious. And so this 3rd alleged victim testified on Friday that she was drunk and on sleeping pills when they had non-consensual sex. And so, of course, she couldn't possibly have consented. She testified that she had voluntarily invited Marius back to her place in Oslo on the 24th of March, 2024, after a party. After having consensual sex, Marius is accused of touching her while she was unable to object, and as I had mentioned, filming her without her knowledge, which is, by the way, a separate charge. She stated, "I wanted to sleep. I was very tired, incredibly exhausted, very drunk. It was hard to keep my eyes open." As she was prone to insomnia, she had taken sleeping pills that night. Now, Marius, of course, is opposing this version of events. According to him, "I didn't see that she had fallen asleep at any point." And he added, this is the part I want to really hone in on because this is telling me what his defense strategy is, that he had a blackout and very vague memories of that evening. In the hours preceding their encounter, again, according to him, he drank alcohol and took ketamine and cocaine. Let's bookmark that while we continue to look at what happened on Friday. So the court was shown 5 videos seized from Høiby's residence. According to the prosecution, the first showed consensual sex between the pair, and the 4 others showed the non-consensual touching of which he is accused. The victim testified that if she had seen that he was filming her, she would have stopped him. "I would never have accepted that." Høiby said, "I don't remember filming, but I've seen them." He's not denying that they exist, and he acknowledges, "Yeah, it's me. I did that." When he was asked by the prosecutor if he had asked for consent, he said, "I don't remember, but I probably thought that she would have protested if it wasn't okay. I have no reason to believe that she wasn't aware of it." Now, there is a common thread here with his victims, and I believe they don't even know each other, these girls. But they have all testified that they only realized what happened to them when they were shown the evidence, the video footage, by police. So they were so passed out and so unconscious, they weren't just merely sleeping. Because if you're sleeping, whether you're a deep sleeper or a light sleeper, you get woken up. But as far as I understand, I don't drink, never have in my life, don't do drugs, so I actually have never been intoxicated. But of course, I've had friends, and you hear people talk about how they black out and they wake up the next morning and they don't even know how they got home. One of my friends in the army woke up with a cheeseburger plastered on the side of his face, he told me. And I was like, how did you not? Anyways, point being, when chemical intoxication is involved, it's a whole different story. And while he is still presumed innocent, the fact that these women didn't even know and were shocked upon being shown this footage corroborates their version of events, which is that they were blackout drunk, passed out. In this woman's case, she took sleeping pills to boot. As far as Marius is concerned, he has repeatedly stated throughout his trial that he is, quote, not in the habit of having sex with women who are sleeping. So back to the defense that he is very obviously mounting here, or at least a mitigating strategy. He's trying to go for the whole, I was so blackout drunk myself. I didn't even know what I was doing. Notice how he said in his testimony, I don't remember filming the videos, but I've seen them. It's me, but I didn't do it intentionally. So he's angling for intent, even though intent is not a necessary criminal element in all offenses. Now, as I've mentioned, I'm an Australian lawyer, and lawyers don't just walk around being encyclopedias of the law in every jurisdiction in the world. But I did look up Norway's laws when it comes to intoxication, the defense, quote unquote, of intoxication. And it turns out it is quite similar to Australia, meaning that it's not a defense if you've voluntarily self-intoxicated. And when we say intoxicated, the law considers being drug-addled, using drugs as well. It's not just alcohol. According to Section 45 of the Penal Code in Norway, unconsciousness resulting from self-induced intoxication, induced by alcohol or other substances, does not exclude punishment. Regardless of which intoxication has been used, so alcohol, drugs, even medications, etc., how it was ingested, and whether the intoxication is typical or atypical. Now, they go through the definitions of that very briefly. Typical intoxication is when you kind of go through a gradual lapse of, consciousness and self-control as the dose of alcohol increases, and then eventually you pass out. Whereas atypical, they've defined, is when certain things happen, such as mental disturbances, suddenly after a relatively small dose. The usual signs of intoxication, unsteady gait, slurred speech, etc., may be absent, but nevertheless, consciousness becomes severely clouded, delusions and hallucinations may occur, and afterwards, this is key for Marius, because he's claiming this, the person generally remembers nothing of what happened during the intoxication. And so that's what makes this very tricky and difficult for Marius, because the law in Norway clearly says it doesn't matter if your intoxication was typical or atypical. Section 45 of the Penal Code, which basically presumes that you were conscious, effectively that you were sober, rather, is what I should say, will still apply to you. Now, there is the whole notion of intent, which really mostly applies to, for instance, murder versus manslaughter. If you get into a car drunk, even in Australia, most parts of the world, and you kill someone accidentally, you did not intend on killing them, then that's manslaughter. That's where intent really comes into play. When it comes to assaulting women in their sleep, I mean, look, people say when you're drunk, you're uninhibited and the truth comes out. Your true intentions come out. Your true thoughts come out. And so the law follows that logic of, well, you probably would have done this even if you were not intoxicated. Whereas accidentally killing someone when you're driving, when you're drunk, you probably wouldn't have done had you not been intoxicated. Clearly, in his testimony, he never once alleged that his drink was spiked or that he was somehow involuntarily intoxicated. So clearly, this defense is a non-defense, basically is what I'm saying. However, it does come into play when it comes to the severity of the punishment. So the sentencing phase. even though self-induced intoxication does not grant you basically immunity from prosecution or punishment rather, it may, in particularly mitigating circumstances, lead to a less harsh sentence, a more lenient sentence. Whether Marius's case qualifies and meets these mitigating circumstances is, of course, unknown to all of us at this stage. It's going to be up to the judge or judges. Sorry, I'm not too well familiar with the legal system in Norway. Not sure how many judges they have sitting on a case, but it's something that will be relevant further down the line once we get there. It may very well be the case that he's been strategizing with his lawyers and they're like, look, you're done for, mate. You know, you've been caught red-handed. There is video footage. The most you can do now is try to angle for a more lenient sentence. Something tells me that's what they're going for. Let me know what you think in the comments below. From one stain on a royal family to another. So now we move on to the Epstein York Files, or the York Files, I will call them, because I'm going to be making parallels with the Windsor file later in the episode. Now we all know what's been happening with Andrew, Mountbatten-Windsor, when it comes to the Epstein file dump. We've all seen the photos, and I'm sure we've all seen a lot of the email interactions. Most recently, he's been under a lot of heat over not only allegations of a sexual nature, but sharing confidential trade documents while he was the trade envoy for the UK with none other than Epstein himself. The Thames Valley Police, which serves the west area of London, which includes Windsor, has confirmed that it is looking into these new allegations against Andrew. I was going to say Prince Andrew. You know, old habits die hard. We can confirm receipt of this report and are assessing the information in line with our established procedures, they had said in a statement. Now, I'm not clear on whether they're investigating every new, quote unquote, new revelation that we have learned from the Epstein files, which includes allegations of, you know, sleeping with minors, etc., etc. But it seems as though the particular focus has been on an email exchange from November 30th, 2010, which shows the former prince forwarding to Epstein visit reports for Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen in relation to his recent visit to Southeast Asia. And now this is while he was the trade envoy. So he was representing the government in an official capacity. He was not just being, you know, a private citizen going around, you know, being a tourist, basically, and sharing information and photos with his best pal, Epstein. Even more importantly, for the purposes of what we're going to be discussing in this segment, is that the email wasn't even sent by Andrew himself. It was sent by Amit Patel, who signed as the special advisor to the then Duke of York and appeared to contain an attached document file and was forwarded to Epstein within 5 minutes of receipt. I'm reading from an NBC News report, and they couldn't confirm exactly what was in the document. So they could look at the email and verify its existence, but not the attachments. But the names of the attachments really are telling. I mean, I've put up a screenshot for you to look at. It would be very awkward for me to read out exactly what's written, but you can see Hong Kong, October 2010, Shenzhen, October 2010, Singapore, October 2010, and Vietnam, October 2010. And there's more. Turns out this email isn't the only one that references Andrew's trips abroad. In September 2010, David Stern, again, bookmark this, an aide to the then prince, sends an email to Epstein and tells him that Andrew is planning a trip to Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen, which of course Andrew ended up going to and then sending information in November through Mr. Patel. Then in October 2010, Stern messaged Epstein via Skype. Was Skype even still active in 2010? Wow. I mean, I was a kid in 2010. Pretty sure Skype was already dead, but I digress. Back in Hong Kong from Shenzhen. So he was not only telling him where they were going and sending final reports, but also keeping Epstein up to date for whatever reason. The central question, which the king and the queen have recently been faced with publicly, they've been heckled by a few people, is how much do you know? And why Don't you force your brother to cooperate with the police and make a statement at least, go to Congress, testify, help them out? A Buckingham Palace spokesperson said in a statement last Monday that if approached by police, the king was, quote, ready to support them as you would expect. The king has made clear in words and through unprecedented actions, meaning stripping him of his titles, of course, and evicting him from Royal Lodge, his profound concern at allegations which continue to come to light in respect of Mr. Mountbatten-Windsor's conduct. Their Majesties' thoughts and sympathies have been and remain with the victims of any and all forms of abuse. And also, just as an aside, according to an anti-monarchy organization called Republic, they are instructing lawyers to consider a private prosecution against Andrew over allegations of sexual assault, corruption, and misconduct in public office. Now, why is this a big deal? As I said, apart from the sexual allegations, which if true are incredibly serious and are criminal in some aspects if the girls were underage, in relation to the trade envoys, they are usually barred, as one would expect, from sharing sensitive or commercial documents under confidentiality rules. It's very much the same with any high-level government job. You always get vetted, you get a clearance. I did, and it keeps getting updated as well. And I wasn't a trade envoy, I was simply a member of the Australian Army. But even civilian jobs, these things are taken very seriously no matter who you are, because you are getting access, and there are levels of access and levels of clearance, of course. Not sure what the clearance level is for a trade envoy. I'm gonna guess it's pretty high up there, but essentially you are getting access to very sensitive information, and you, in many cases, can't even share it with your parents or your spouse, if not in all cases, depending again on the level of secrecy. You're not meant to share this information, basically. It's for work purposes and work purposes only. And then, of course, you have the added layer of Epstein. Why is he interested? There are, of course, all the rumors about him being a Mossad agent, etc., which I obviously cannot confirm or deny, but we have to acknowledge that that could be a possibility. In fact, the fact that he's looking for information of this nature lends some credibility to allegations of, him being an agent of some sort. But what I'm more interested in discussing further is the question of how much the palace was aware of. As someone who is immensely interested in history, many of you out there who also hold the same interest would probably have noticed the very cyclical nature of humans, I suppose. Things keep happening in a pattern. I have a whole video dedicated to that almost. It was more to do with censorship, but the beginning of the video, I explored the whole concept of this cycle of things happening in the same pattern over and over and over again because humans never learn. This instantly reminded me of the Windsor Files. When I heard of, Andrew potentially sharing trade secrets, confidential government information, abusing his position with outsiders. That's exactly what Edward, the Duke of Windsor, and Wallace, but we'll focus on Edward here, was accused of doing. And in fact, was potentially proven to have done, according to the Marburg or Windsor files that were discovered in Germany after the war. Once they were discovered, and I believe it was by the Americans, the British government basically went into panic mode and wanted all the documents, wanted to make sure the Americans would not make a copy. And basically, Winston Churchill, who was very fond of Edward, wanted to keep them a secret. He denied their existence. He denied any allegations that were contained within them that may have, slipped and gone through the grapevine, etc., and always staunchly maintained that Edward would never have betrayed the British government. Edward was not a Nazi sympathizer, because that's what these documents basically allege. Edward was not a spy. He wasn't in cahoots with the Nazis, and he was not sharing confidential information with them. Eventually, these files were made available, and scholars and historians combed through them, and effectively, the question really becomes whether you believe these files or not. Maybe it was just the Germans planting a false trail. I'm just being devil's advocate here, because the Germans were very put off by Edward. towards the end. They basically they tried to kidnap him. They tried to kidnap him and Wallace right before they were going off to the Bahamas. How much did the palace know? Or did the UK government know? The reason I pointed out to you that these two particular names, being Amit Patel and David Stern, who are both staff members, and for some reason he was comfortable with directing them to pass on what one would assume was confidential information to Epstein. Now, we weren't there. We don't know the context. We don't know whether they put up a fight. We don't know whether they questioned him. We don't know whether they acted against their will. I mean, come on, one would assume they would have at least excused themselves. And I don't know what their situation is, but if you're made to do something that is illegal, one would hope that you would protest. And if your principal insists, then you'd resign, I suppose, is the right thing to do. But we're humans. We are so beyond flawed. Did they not report to anyone? Did they not tell anyone in the palace hierarchy? And I'm not necessarily just talking about the family. I'm talking about the institution. Did they not tell anyone that this happened? Personally, I find it difficult to believe. Had Andrew sent these emails by himself directly from his account to Epstein, secretly behind his staff's back, one could make that argument. It would be plausible to say the staff didn't know, the palace didn't know. Andrew was just acting off his own accord. Every time he went to Epstein, he made sure he slipped away from his staff and his security team, let's say. This is all hypothetical, of course. I don't know whether he did that. But he would slip away. There were accusations that Edward didn't want his protection at some point during the war because, the insinuation was he wasn't free to do what he wanted because he knew he was being spied on by the British government. One thing I will say about the British government is they never trusted Edward, by the way. They may have covered up for him because of personal bias and, they liked him, or Winston Churchill, had a soft spot for him. But at the same time, they were spying on him. They sent protection guards under the pretense of we need to keep you safe, but they were definitely spying and reporting back to the government, which is why the British government was so keen on getting him to the Bahamas, getting him out of Europe, out of the Nazis' grasp. And they succeeded. So I don't blame people who are asking these questions. I don't think the king and the queen should be heckled. They are both not only at an advanced age, but the king is sick and he wasn't the one in charge at the time. It was the late queen, of course. People are alleging that the late queen personally paid to settle Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit against Andrew. They always did say he was her favorite, whether that's why she protected him or whether she just wanted to put this, to a stop and make sure he doesn't testify. And we've all seen how he performs, that notorious interview from 2019. I think they were worried that if he went ahead and testified, things would only get worse, not just for him, but for the monarchy, which is, yes, a very selfish viewpoint. But, monarchies are kind of like humans, survival at all costs. But back to my point, I just find it difficult to believe that the staff didn't know, the palace didn't know, the queen didn't know, because unless these two people, which they have been reached out for comment, Mr. Patel and Stern, no response yet, unless they kept it to themselves and were covering for their principal, it's virtually impossible for the palace not to have known.
I do think the palace have a lot of questions to answer about what they knew, when they knew it, what they did and what they're going to do, because for many years they've tried to suppress this story. So instead of actually being open and actually admitting what's going on, they're still trying to shut the story down, which I think is very worrying.
And so the parallels start. Okay, so you've got reports coming back to the palace, to the government. They are aware, and yet the insinuation is they haven't done anything to curb it or to discipline Andrew and make it stop, basically. I will say that, at least in relation to the trade envoy potential betrayal. In 2011, so this was announced by the BBC on the 21st of July 2011, around 8 months after the November email was sent, that Prince Andrew was to stand down as UK trade envoy. Reading straight from the article, Buckingham Palace has confirmed that Prince Andrew will give up his title as Britain's special representative for trade and investment. The prince has been criticized over his friendship with controversial figures. This was all the way back in 2011, including convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, an American financier. His friendship with Mr. Epstein, who was sentenced to 18 months in prison in 2008 for soliciting a minor for prostitution, led to calls for Prince Andrew to step down from his role in March. But Prime Minister David Cameron gave him his full backing. So there you have it. When you consider the date, 2011, right after the end of 2010, it seems very likely that it wasn't just public calls for Prince Andrew to step down that ended his term or his tenure as the UK trade envoy. I have a sneaking suspicion, of course I can't prove it, that the British government realized what he'd done. That he basically effectively traded secret information, violated potentially the Secrecy Act. Not clear on whether royals are held to that. I'm going to assume they are because they are human beings at the end of the day. But realized what he'd done and stripped him of the position. The timing is just too opportune, which is also a parallel, by the way, when it comes to the Windsor Files. Because yes, the government, or I should say Winston Churchill, may have been covering for Edward, but at the same time, he did not trust him. They sent him off to the Bahamas because they didn't trust him, because they wanted him as far away as possible from Europe and from the hands of the Germans. And once that 5-year stint was finished, he was effectively excommunicated. They wanted nothing to do with him. When I say they, I mean not just the government, but also his own family. They saw him as a liability. They cut him loose. He really wasn't welcome back. His wife was most definitely not welcome. And he was exiled. For all intents and purposes, he was exiled, which of course lends credibility to the argument that he was indeed a Nazi spy. But you can see the parallels here. Andrew was trusted. He was given this position, and it looks like, at least according to these emails and also this BBC report from 15 years ago now, that he potentially abused his position and was then stripped, removed, no more access to this information. You have shown that you cannot be trusted. But perhaps, just like with the Windsor Files, they still kept it under cover, under wraps, just to protect him. It's interesting. I've spent the last couple of years making parallels between the Sussexes and the Windsors. And now here we are getting a very strong parallel, almost history repeating itself yet again, between not Harry this time and Meghan, but Andrew. And yes, also Sarah Ferguson. I haven't covered her because I haven't looked into enough of what she's been doing. However, interestingly, this 2011 report from the BBC, which I dug up to confirm when Andrew was stripped of his position as trade envoy, does mention Sarah, the Duchess, or the ex-Duchess of York. The BBC reported matters had been made worse when his former wife, Sarah Ferguson, admitted having accepted £15,000 from Mr. Epstein to help pay off her debts. In the 4 months since these facts became public, royal and government officials have been grappling with the challenge of what to do with the Duke of York. Everything repeats itself in patterns. I have no recollection of this from 2011 because I was a kid. And now as an adult, it's effectively the same thing happening all over again, except with far more serious consequences this time around, and a lot more evidence being the Epstein file dump to back the allegations up. And finally, on a much lighter tone, not really though, considering the social media, teenage, child safety aspect of it, but, you know, with all this heaviness we've talked about, I suppose covering Meghan and Harry is going to naturally be lighter. You know how we've all spent, the last 5 years talking about how Meghan is inevitably going to show the faces of her children on social media, the less social credibility and gravitas she and her husband have, the more we've seen of her children. Well, guess what? I'm sure you've all seen this by now, but for her Valentine's Day post on Instagram, Meghan decided that long gone are the days of simply showing the back of her children's heads. No. We need more clicks and news now. And so she presented to us a side profile for the very first time, I think, quite a clear one at least, of Lilibet, her little child. Now, normally I wouldn't post photos of children on my channel, but this is public and I'm really trying to make a point here. The photo is up. You can practically see what she looks like. She's got the Markle nose, that much is clear, but this is the clearest we've ever seen of this little girl. How old is she? 4, 5? And of course, people have noticed that the son, Archie, is nowhere to be seen. But the point of all this is, we've been saying it for years. It's not even that we're all psychic. It's that we could see it. You could see it from a mile off. It was so obvious, the pattern. Initially, we want to keep our children completely private and give them normal lives, and we're not even going to give them titles. And then we all said, yeah, right. Then Meghan, of course, complained on the Oprah interview about how they weren't given titles. Wait, didn't you say you didn't want any? I mean, that's definitely what your ex-mouthpiece, Omid Scobie, reported on. Meghan and Harry just want a normal life for their kids. That's why they don't want titles. Anyways, they complained about it, pretended it was down to racism. That lie was called out. And then as the years progressed and as Meghan and Harry became less and less relevant, the kids came out. Yes, it was the back of the heads. Actually, first it was a thumb and an eyeball and a foot and what have you. And then it was the back of the head. And then it was their full body, but obscured somehow. And now this. Meghan is so predictable. She is as clear as glass. You can see right through her. And again, you see what I mean by, is this week 3 of me saying this isn't hate? This is simply calling out what we're seeing. It's the truth. It's like accusing people of saying the sky is blue, that we're hating on the sky at this point. Everything we have been saying, from Archwell being a shady institution or charity to the children clearly being used as clickbait, clearly being monetized, we called it out years ago, okay? The sky is blue. What makes this even more ironic is she did this right on the heel of Prince Harry giving a supposedly emotional talk to parents who have lost their children, they say to the internet, to social media. We don't know the context, of course, but basically the implication is they wouldn't have taken their own lives had they not experienced the adverse effect of social media and the internet. You may have heard that a landmark court case against social media giants, I believe it's Meta, potentially YouTube, TikTok and Snapchat, I believe, have settled for an undisclosed sum. But a case has been brought against these tech giants by parents who claim that they are responsible for the deaths of their children. Now, we're not going to go into the legalities and facts of that. That's a whole different topic that I suppose I can prepare for a future episode. But the point here is Prince Harry, literally a couple of days prior to Valentine's Day, was giving an emotional, quote unquote, he's been feeling really emotional lately. He's crying in court, crying in front of people. And look, there's nothing wrong with being emotional. But that becomes very difficult to believe, even if he is genuine, because he's not the one posting stories of his kids and photos of his kids. However, he's literally in this photo with his child, with his daughter, for the entire world to see and, yes, criticize, because there are really nasty people out there who think that it's okay to criticize people's appearance, including children. And sure, people can blame Meghan and say, she's the master puppeteer, she's posting this, it's her idea, it's her Instagram after all. At the end of the day, Harry is and always has been complicit. Even if you're not the instigator, you're just as guilty if you're a co-conspirator or silently going along. It's really hard to take someone seriously when they spend their time preaching about the importance of, keeping your children safe while their wife is practically making a living by posting photos of her children online at this point. No one's really interested in as ever. Her podcasts have flopped. Netflix is down the drain. Everything is finished. And now all they have are their children, who are supposed to be sacred. Especially Meghan and Harry. They know. They like to tell us how they're the most bullied people in the world, and Meghan's the most trolled, woman in 2018, the most bullied person on the internet. She's constantly trying to remind us of this, and yet, knowing that she and her husband are a target because of their actions, but again, besides the point, they are a target and they are still willingly putting their children, serving them up right there in the crosshairs. And I think that's all I have to say. That's all I have to say for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. And please, if you can help support this channel, go on and visit Also, if you like what we do here and would like to support the channel and see it grow, please do consider joining Patreon. You can get ad-free and whenever applicable, uncensored versions of the Plutonium Show episodes and every other video that I post on YouTube. This started back in September of 2025, so you won't find anything older than that. But Patreon will continue to be a permanent home for these videos, even if they are taken down from YouTube due to demonetization, or perhaps I'm cleaning up house and decluttering because I tend to do that a lot. You will find them on Patreon as long as Patreon exists. Really, it's just a way to support the channel and show appreciation if you feel so inclined. That's all. My battery tells me the camera is gonna die, and so I'm gonna have to cut it off here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next week or next video. Bye-bye.